Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
All right, for some reason wouldn't let me have that, pick them up. Let me get the rest of them. Just a second here, folks. I'm not sure why it wouldn't let us do this. You are live.
Okay.
And so the guest is coming.
All right. Well, okay, everybody, we're live, so let me do the intro. Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin. Today we have co-host Dr. Sasha Lessin and Karen Christine Patrick, and we're going to be on a panel interviewing our special guest, Nathan-Rosenblum. And there is a Kingston lecture coming up, which we're going to discuss today. And Nathan is also going to discuss the Sirius star system and its inhabitants and their influence on Earth from ancient times to the present. And please bear with us while we get everybody on board. Sorry for the phone ring, but while we're waiting, I will tell you about Dr. Nathan-Rosenblum, who has a Ph.D. in Metaphysical Philosophy. He is an ordained interfaith minister, a ceremonial magician, and a Theosophist. He lives in Upstate New York, where he regularly lectures and teaches courses on a wide variety of esoteric topics. A longtime student of mysticism and the occult, Dr. Rosenblum integrates a wide variety of spiritual concepts and information into his programs, covering cultures and religious movements throughout the world, as well as information relating to hidden influences in society. He is also an author of both fiction and nonfiction pieces and a poet. The emphasis of his work is to demonstrate the interconnections between ideas and show how these can form a synthesis, spiritually uniting people. All right, let's Sasha, Dr. Lessin, before we bring on Nathan.
Yeah, I'm really interested in some of the subjects that Dr. Rosenblum has to talk about. Manuel Lamroy had talked about how settlers from the Lyrans basically had instructed the people that ultimately became the Nibiruans, who were around Sirius C before Nova, that they would have to prepare and taught them how to go within a planet, how to use the heat of a planet and the energy of a planet for the time when Sirius C would explode and shoot them out of the area. And then later on, the Nibiruans, according to Lamroy, were kicked out by the people that became the Nibiruans, and we'll go on with the story. But I've seen a number of versions of this that are so the same and so different too, and I'm hoping for some clarity from you, Dr. Rosenblum.
And before we bring on Nathan, Karen, would you like to chime in and give us your 2 cents and your aloha?
Oh, aloha, and yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, yes, I'm very much looking forward to this as well. As many of you know, I'm a contactee, and I had an Anunnaki ancestor contact me. And the first thing he said to me was he was Anunnaki, and it took me a while to absorb that. The second thing he said, too, he was Syrian descent. So I'm really anxious to learn more about that particular story of how this influence on Earth, and we see signs of that everywhere. So very excited.
Okay, we're very excited to do this show today with you, Dr. Rosenblum. Nathan, welcome to the Sacred Matrix.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. It's such a delight to have you on our show.
Very nice. Yes, I am very pleased to be here.
Would you like to...
Wait, I wanted to ask, are you going to do the Kingston lecture in Kingston, New York, or Kingston, Jamaica?
Oh, the Kingston lecture is in Kingston, New York, yes.
New York, okay. Yes. It's the one that Jennifer Stein is working on, or is presenting as well. So, Nathan, can I call you Nathan? Is that okay for us to call you Nathan?
Of course. Nathan, yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'd like you to fill in the gaps on your bio for our listeners, and also tell us a little bit more about your work. And we'll let you talk for about 10, 15 minutes, and then Karen and Sasha and I, Dr. Lessin and I, will ask you questions, okay? So go ahead and take it away and tell us more about yourself and your work.
Yes, thank you. From my earliest days, I have always been fascinated with the ideas of spirituality and how that connects to the nature of existence. And so I came to understand, again, at quite a young age, that spirituality is an inherent quality of existence. Indeed, that existence is by its very nature spiritual. And I then also came to understand that in this way, there were also, therefore, an immense variety of ways in which this spiritual nature could and does express itself. This is through all the religions and spiritual traditions of the world, as well as through all manner of cultural understandings and how those connect, again, to a unified spirituality. I came to understand also that the different religions and spiritual systems, as they connected to this unified whole, all contained aspects of each other and therefore were interrelated, and that therefore it was necessary to have a wide-based understanding of these traditions to see how they, in their different expressions, and geared towards a particular group and time period in which they began to manifest, connected to this unified spiritual essence. And furthermore, I came to understand that this spiritual essence cannot be separated from other aspects of knowledge. By this, I mean that all other topics, sociopolitics, culture, and all other, many of the other aspects of what are conceived of the components of the world, that all of these really represent interconnected pieces, and that therefore one would have to see not only the unity in these ideas, but that one component by its very nature is bound to affect the others. And from this, I began to develop a world view, a unity of the ideas of spiritual and socio-political freedom and understanding. And what this entails, for me, represents the idea of spiritual unity for all people, while at the same time maintaining a sense of social justice and a sense of allowing people to develop their own individuality. That is to say, each person would have his or her own level of spiritual understanding, a component of this spiritual and cultural understanding. But all of these components would be seen as part of a unified whole. So in this sense, with my work, when I was working on my various degrees in my formal education, of course, much of my studies have been, the vast majority have been independent. But you can see this, for example, in the fact that I got my bachelor's degree in English with a minor in history, my master's in a general study area known as liberal studies, which covered a wide variety of historical and literary and cultural topics, and my Ph.D. in metaphysical philosophy. I think that the compartmentalization of knowledge is a very harmful, dangerous, and indeed inaccurate way of seeing the world, and beyond the world, indeed, because you cannot isolate knowledge. Knowledge is ultimately a unified space of understanding. So in my own personal life, I have applied this in a number of ways. As it was indicated, I am a Theosophist, that is to say the Theosophical movement of Madame Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott and many of the others, but also, therefore, there is the idea of a religious unity, the unity of all faiths, seeing how all spiritual systems and founds of esoteric knowledge and understanding are interconnected. Then we have the idea of my being a ceremonial magician, that is to say, one who would summon spirits and communicate with various sorts of spirit entities and indeed other types of extraterrestrial beings as such, through the use of what is termed as ceremonial magic. And then, of course, we have the ministerial component of this. In this capacity would allow me not only to perform on a legal basis ceremonial ideas, but practices marriages and such. I'm legally ordained to do this, but more to the point is, to my mind, the idea of therefore being a spiritual teacher to assist people in understanding how their religious beliefs and understandings may be seen as being connected to this unified spiritual whole. And of course, with this spirituality, as I said, the number of topics that connect to this are vast and innumerable, and it is necessary for me to continually study and learn to gain not only the concrete information, but also I continue more and more, and this does amaze me, to see about all of these interconnections. And I consider this that something valuable, a work that I believe that should be engaged in by people as a whole. I do maintain that if people throughout the world continue to study and understand this idea of the spiritual unity, then at the same way there can be understanding between people. At the same time, we are not forcing everyone into one conforming pattern of spirituality, but rather that they would see that these are components of this larger whole, and therefore have not only respect but understanding for others. And that, I believe, can only be truly built upon a spiritual basis. Again, ideas of social justice and other things are essential, but the spiritual basis is essential. Now, in my life and my work, I lecture on a wide variety of esoteric topics, showing about how all of these things interconnect. For example, the esoteric history of the Hudson Valley, where I live, on topics ranging from music, architecture and monuments, poetry, all manner of things relating to crystals, plants, and myriad of other ideas and topics, that I feel all of them connect to this concept of this universal knowledge base, with this spiritual understanding being central. extraterrestrials and the study of them and communication with extraterrestrials also do play a very substantial role in my work, and I do see that as being a very important component on numerous levels to understanding this idea of spiritual unity and all the phenomena there involved. So what I endeavor to do with some of my other programs, I regularly lecture at many other venues, including the New Life Expo in Manhattan, is to try to help expand levels of understanding amongst people so that they perhaps might again see more of these connections. I do produce, or rather have produced, with assistance of production crew of Goldmine Audio, a variety of DVDs and CDs on these topics. You can find out more information on these on my website, which is www.theserpentrises.com. There includes a calendar of numerous other events that are coming up, future plans, discussion of certain other activities, as well as links for the purchase of my programs. But the most important thing for me has to do with the idea of expanding the information that people have. I believe that this information and knowledge for people is of extremely profound importance for their own personal understanding, and more to the point, for then how they'll be able to view society and their place within it. So if people are interested, if you have any questions or other topics specifically you'd like to discuss, whenever you're ready, I'd be happy to discuss.
Oh, yes, indeed, Nathan. I see that everything you have said so far is based on a dichotomy between spiritual and mundane or non-spiritual, and I dig it, but could you explain to our listeners what you mean? How is spiritual different than everyday?
I see spirituality as an inherent quality. Therefore, there is nothing entirely separate from what is spiritual. However, so many people are distracted by what we may refer to as Maya. That is the traditional Buddhist term for it, which we may translate as illusion. Now, what do we mean by illusion? Now, in the ultimate sense, what we perceive as matter is also, holographic. So it may be considered as Maya. Time may be considered as Maya. Even karma is ultimately to be considered as Maya. However, specifically, there is the idea of a sort of, we may say, distraction for many people that they perceive, get so caught up in things, for example, of their own personal lives or of their daily activities, different types of what are considered work or things, that they do not connect not only to their own spiritual understanding, but indeed to their own level of consciousness. These things do not bring them joy, do not increase understanding. And these mundane things, obviously, they may have a place in how we live in the day-to-day world, but at the same time, it is absolutely essential for people to understand that this spiritual component is an essential point. Now, spirituality does not mean simply going to church on Sundays. Spirituality is a state of being that in an ideal sense should be understood as ever present. Remember, the only time that we truly exist, the only is now. And therefore, what we need to understand is that we ought to live our lives in such a way that we may say that we are acting in a spiritual manner. And this is the sort of thing that has to do ultimately with what we may consider consciousness, our consciousness of a spiritual understanding. This consciousness may be termed as a gnosis, for example. And specifically, this is the idea that we should be inherent in all that we do. It should become are understood to be our nature, because truly this is, we have been forgotten at so many people. But this is our true nature, this spiritual gnosis, understanding. So that which is inherent in our daily lives. So we ought to recognize this as an essential component of who we are. Indeed, it is who we are.
Very cool. Thanks.
Okay. Karen, do you have a question?
More of a statement. I really like what was said about that we have this disassociation of knowledge one from another, this compartmentalization that happens. And as I myself work through my own spiritual understanding, the idea that everything is one is pretty abstracted until you kind of really work through ideas of the quantum hologram and how everything is manifesting what we feel as matter is inside its own context, and possibly that consciousness is the medium, really, of everything that we feel with our senses. So I think that's really profound, and it takes a while. Like, I came from a kind of a fundamentalist Christian background. It took me a while to kind of stop thinking of spirituality as a separate thing, like something you do on a different day. You have a good time on the weekend, and Sunday you go to church, and now you're going to be spiritual or think spiritual thoughts. But now I'm in a space of beginning to integrate all of that together, that everything I'm experiencing is spiritual. And it's really a profound concept. And I was wondering if you had more to say about that.
Yes, well, the idea of understanding the spirituality rather than confining it to a certain period of time, this is an inherent characteristic that all religions and spiritual traditions have emphasized. The idea that one cannot separate one's spirituality from one's daily life, that it is not something simply to be confined to a particular time, but rather should be understood as inherent. We may see this, for example, in the way we interact with people. So much of the time, there is a tendency to treat others with almost a sense of utility, we might say, that one interacts with others to the extent that we may see them as being of some use to us, rather than understanding that this idea of separateness between people is indeed Maya, that is to say, illusion. Therefore, that how we act towards another as we perceive it is really very much a reflection upon ourselves. So what this would mean in daily practice is the idea we may call compassion. Now, compassion is somewhat of a misunderstood concept frequently. It does not mean that we are required to agree with others, or even that we necessarily condone actions, but rather it has to do, to my understanding, with the sense of seeing the supposed other as being a reflection to a certain extent of oneself, because, again, the idea of separateness is Maya, illusion. Therefore, the way we treat others or respond to others is by the very nature a spiritual concept. We may see this in anything that we do. The way we act in our lives, the way that we perceive others or events or things going on around us, all of these are by their very nature connected with a spiritual sense. The idea that as we perceive and connect with these things, so do they reflect our understanding of this spiritual unity, or our lack of understanding thereof, but more to the point, that they reflect how we perceive ourselves. And this is a key point, because to a great extent, the way we perceive others is really very much a reflection of ourselves. So this attitude is not simply for others, but rather ultimately also directly connects to an appreciation and an understanding on a spiritual level of one's nature. And this nature, you must understand, is the direct connection to the divine principle, which is so frequently overlooked. But that, in this sense, we capture, to a great extent, the essence of the spiritus sancti, the divine nature.
If I would try to apply something of what you're saying. When I think of ISIS beheading people, and I try to relate to, are there parts of myself, dominant subpersonalities, that behead or disown parts of myself? Is that what the kind of thing you mean?
Very much so. Indeed, how we react to others and events going on around us is certainly very much a connection. And what we see ultimately, understanding the unity, is to a great extent a reflection, again, of what we are as a spiritual unity of humanity. Now, of course, that does not mean that we condone particular acts, but rather that with the idea of compassion, we gain a sense of understanding that while we may oppose the act, that does not indicate an opposition to an individual as such, that all individuals are imbued with a spiritual nature that is the direct microcosm of the divine principle. And therefore, that it is always necessary to keep this in mind. And again, this does connect to the same idea.
I'm sorry I interrupted, but if I were going to, in psychology, what I would do when I talk about parts of me that cut off other parts, or the parts of the culture of ISIS that cuts off human beings' heads, what I ask is, what does this suppressed or beheaded part really need? Not just what it wants, like to kill other people, but what are the underlying needs that motivate it? When I get to the level of needs in psychology, we get what we call egocentric. Maybe what people in ISIS need is respect and a job and attention, or something like that. That's the step I take it further. Could you react to that?
Well, yes, that is a very important point, because this brings up the idea of the ego. Now, the ego, that is to say, the I separate, is of course itself Maya, and a very ultimately detrimental component of it. Because while we may have, like I say, our own individuality or perception that is inevitable, at the same time, the idea of ego as it applies separateness on a spiritual level from other beings, that is very detrimental. So, when we understand the whys of a particular, not just it, but the motivating factors, as you mentioned, that this is a significant component and an important step in understanding. We can never, in order to break free of this illusion or Maya of the ego, it is necessary to understand certainly what is the impetus towards these actions or these components of the illusory ego. And so all of these are certainly, that you're absolutely correct, essential to understanding things. And this is a point that I very much bring out in my lectures and programs, the idea of understanding this unity and thus being able to transcend these illusory components.
Okay. I have a couple questions, and then we'll come back to that. Very important point. I wanted to cover your name of your website is what is it? The
www.theserpentrises.com.
The Serpent Rises, and you have an image of the Ouroboros. What is the reasoning? Your reasoning, Ouroboros, as your reasoning for the name The Serpent Rises? What do you intend by that? What does that mean to you, and what would you like to convey to our listeners about what that means? Mm-hmm.
Yes. The idea of the serpent is one of the most universal cultural symbols throughout the world. And we can see that in all of the cultures in which it is used, it connects to a number of similar ideas. One of these ideas has to do with the level of consciousness. For example, and the spiritual energy, the prana, will, mana, or what have you, as it is called, chi, ki, in various cultures. And the idea of the energetic channels along the spinal column. And the idea of this serpent energy rising to connect with the pineal gland, the third eye chakra, and thus out of the body, and to understand the spiritual connection to the universal whole. And furthermore, we may understand this spiritual consciousness to also be connected to the idea of gnosis, of spiritual understanding. This is why Yeshua Barnabas, called Jesus the Christ, has stated that be ye wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. You see, the idea of a serpent being connected with knowledge, we see this, as I said, as a cultural universal. The serpent in Eden, the nakash, that's Hebrew for serpent, on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the serpent being a conduit of knowledge. We may see this in the Pythian Apollo in Greece, with the python coming to be a symbol of Apollo and the bringing of light. By light we mean wisdom and illumination. We may see this in all cultures, really, throughout the world, that where the serpent symbolism is present, which is throughout Americas, throughout Asia, Africa, Europe, Australia. All of these, it again connects to this gnosis, which then is also connected to the generative energy of creation. Now, knowledge, of course, is a neutral component or characteristic. Remember, knowledge may be used for what we may consider good or evil. Now, these, to an extent, are value judgments and therefore also Maya. But knowledge, or gnosis, is understood to being the key to understanding the divine principle. That faith is all well and good, but can take you only so far, whereas gnosis, understanding, goes beyond belief, but to know that the divine, that God, for lack of a better term, as we would call it, is and is present. And that is what I am trying to show. And with the Ouroboros, the idea of this spiritual continuity without beginning or end is what I emphasize through the name of the website.
I find it interesting that there's some very concrete allusions to Alalu, for example, the first Nibiran to come to Earth, finding and being enthralled by finding a snake, and later on it also is associated with the Nagas who come from Agartha, or inner Earth, and so besides its symbolic form, there seems to be, and sometimes even shown as a way of showing electricity, or the clan of Enki, the scientist, chief scientist of the Anunnaki. But I'm also struck by the Hopi way, where they talk about a great serpent that would devour people, and how their ancestors tricked it to go underground and just receive a sacrifice every so often of a child. And it seems to me that besides all the symbolism of the snake, that there's some real history with snakes, and it's important in the realization of the people here. I don't know what you think of that.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Certainly the Draco-type extraterrestrials from Thuban, and some of the other associated groups do on an energetic level connect very strongly to snakes. Energetically, their vibration is quite similar, and they will say this. There, as well as, of course, the general physical similarities. But then also, there has also been, for example, with the Hopi, we then also do see very much historical components. Now, the Hopi in their religion claim to be related to the Pleiadians. But they have also talked about other people when they were moving through the Sipapu up to the surface of this, the current Earth, about how they were assisted by the ant people, who would what we would know as the Zeta Reticuli Greys, and by various other groups. And so part of their Hopi religion, with the emphasis with the snakes, again, does have to do with encounters with the Draco between their Pleiadian ancestors as well. And indeed, there has always been a very strong Draco presence in numerous parts of the world, certainly in the southwestern United States. Underground, we do see these things. This is like what Richard Shaver notes in, I remember, Lemuria and his other stories about, and he specifically, there actually is the indication that the Deros and Teros, their warfare and such, some of that did occur in the region specifically, in the Four Corners area in Arizona, and that particular. And so, again, that does very much connect with the Hopi religion and the same idea. And we can see this in numerous other cultural and historical ideas with serpents, absolutely, in many different parts of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Karen, do you have a question?
No, I just have to say that one of my family members just recently had an encounter. We're in New Mexico, and she was taking the dog out and had an encounter with a rattlesnake behind the bushes, and it was warning her off. And that, that's that natural wariness and connection with Earth that you have to have an awareness. And there's no way and I've had an encounter similar myself, there's no way to not have a really profound experience with that, because this is a very intelligent, very, present creature in nature. And it would take knowledge. It would take knowing, how to respond, knowing your environment, to really make that connection with the physical animal that is representing these spiritual ideas. I'm not far from Chuckle Canyon and those areas. And I'm just really interested, I don't know when we move over to talk more about the extraterrestrial component that you'll be talking about at the conference. But, it seems to me now that I'm down the road here that you just can't have the human story really make a lot of sense ultimately without the fact that we have other beings and other dimensions underground, up in the sky. It's been a part of the folklore. And it really enriches our, understanding of things. And we start to understand our ancestors. They were eyewitnesses to these beings. It wasn't a myth thing. It was an actual encounter that was so profound. They wrote it on walls and pictographs and put it on their pottery. I mean, they were really trying to say, hey, this is really important. So, if you could tell more about that.
Yes, absolutely. You will see this throughout the world with the symbolical and various records of contact with extraterrestrial and with spiritual beings. This has been a fact of existence from the very beginning, from the times of Lemuria and Atlantis, and continuing all the way to the present day. And we can see this both in a wide variety of artwork, in certainly indeed in what written records we do have, as well as, of course, in many aspects of folklore and traditions. And again, like I say, it was understood this was an essential component, that just as there were beings here on Earth, so at the same time there were inhabitants of the other worlds. as well as an ever-present spiritual presence of wide variety, certainly of nature, natural spirits here on Earth, of angelic level spirits, and of many other sorts of beings that were present that they learned to differentiate and identify and understand. And it was also understood that there was also very much a spiritual component to this unity and the way these different beings were represented. To a certain extent, we may see this. I'll be talking about in Sirius, since this will be one of the things I'll be discussing in greater detail in Kingston. We may see this very strongly with Sirius as a spiritual font connecting very strongly with Earth from a wide variety of cultures. For example, some of the most significant on a spiritual level connections with Sirius and its inhabitants have occurred in Egypt and other parts of Africa from a very early period of time. Now, amongst the Egyptians, Sirius was called Sophis. Sirius, the word Sirius, that means the scorcher, because of its appearance would herald the hot days of the summer. And of course, the Egyptian calendrical system was very much closely connected with Sirius, as it was understood that Sophis, Sirius was called by them, would signal the rise of the Nile flood, which was so essential to their agricultural practices. And so with the Egyptians, it was understood that the starry heavens was understood as a spiritual entity in and of itself, separate from other deities and other types of extraterrestrial beings. The night sky, the starry sky, is known as the goddess Nut. And she is portrayed as a woman on all fours, generally, her entire body being covered with stars. And Sirius was seen to be one of the most important stars in this sense, in that it connected to this divine principle. And it was said that at the end of the day, the form of Ra, the sun god, at the night known as Amun, would be swallowed by Nut, the night sky, and then pass through the Duat, which was also where the souls of the departed would travel. And that was ideally to the field of reeds, which is where Egyptians wished to go to avoid having to reincarnate. And that at the end of each night after passing through the Duat, and this is described in text like the book of Duat, the book of Coming Forth by Day, the book of Gates, etc., which were classed as funerary texts, and that each day Nut would give birth to the sun, to Ra again, in the form of Kepra, the form of Ra with the head of a Scarabaeus beetle. And so it was understood specifically that the night sky and that Sirius were identified as spiritual entities in their own right, because the Egyptians, like ancient people throughout the world, understood that the spirituality is again inherent in all things. And the Egyptians did not separate their religion or spiritual practices from the other aspects of their daily life. It would have been shocking to an Egyptian to consider, the idea of spirituality as being separate from other areas of their life, but rather as that their life was spiritual, that spirituality was their life expressed in a myriad of ways. And this is the case throughout cultures throughout the world.
Nathan, I wondered if you could kind of summarize, let's see, we have about 15 minutes before the top of the hour, your version of the cosmology of existence, from source down to 3D physicality, the organization structure, the major principal characters in play, the different beings that are especially influential here in human consciousness.
Yes.
Thank you.
To begin with, we would begin with the eternal spiritual creator which is beyond all Maya, which is beyond all duality. This is what in Hinduism we may call Parabrahman, or the All-Father again, though it is neither male nor female, but merely, more than anything else, a state of spiritual consciousness that is eternal, without beginning and without end. Now, this consciousness, by its nature, emanates what, for lack of a better term, we may call thoughts. And this thoughts would create the beginnings of what we may call duality between, or more exactly dialecticism, between what we would call the masculine and feminine principles. Again, our lack of words to fully explain it is a limiting factor. But we may say, for example, of positive or negative polarities. This would also include things such as dark and light. And again, these are not value judgments, because remember, there can never be one entirely without the other, so long as one within duality. Now, from this concept of two, the masculine and feminine, we may see the emergence of the third primordial principle. And again, this is occurring essentially simultaneously, and it's manifesting continually, which we may call the child principle of emanation, that is the power of creative thinking or the creative understanding. And this is what we may call the formation of spirituality, because spirits, as we would perceive it, are essentially the microcosm emanating from this divine trinity that emanate, like I say, from the Parabrahma, and is powered by what we may call mana or vril or prana, which is the vital energy. Now, from this, again, like I say, we have on the microcosm what we may call spirits, which are not separate from the source. But then also we have the emergence of other forces that are naturally fecundated and brought into being by the merging of what we may call masculine and feminine principles. And one of these is what we may call the creator of what we perceive as the Maya of the physical world. This is what the Gnostics referred to as the demiurge or Yaldabaoth. It is, again, a force. This force has consciousness, of course. And again, this is not a value judgment. Now, this may be considered a force of crystallization that forms the Maya that we perceive as the physical existence. And over these aspects of the physical existence are placed other spirit beings that we may call archons. And so it is throughout all of what we would perceive as the physical. And this leads to the formations of the physical existence. Now, and with physical existence, again, we may have what we consider time, or the Maya of time, therefore manifesting simultaneously, because that is also directly connected to this physical. Now, with this, specifically in relation to what we perceive as Earth, we see this, again, the same idea of this formatory principle, albeit going through numerous cycles of different levels of density. And the formation, therefore, of the spiritual presence, however, are always present. Now, it came to pass, and like I say, of course, we move through the yugas of time and the cycles of time as the Hindu system, which would be very, to my mind, be extremely accurate. And I interpret the yugas in their long form. Now, we have, therefore, on Earth, the manifestation of spirits. For various reasons, there came amongst these spirits what we may call the Maya of desire for presence on this earth. And here we see the first people, as we would say, and of course these are pure spirits, present on earth. And then gradually increasing in levels of density. And this is much the case throughout all physical worlds to one extent or another. Of course, there are also spirit beings, other sorts, that are observing and being involved in this process. Now, from this, we gradually move into more and more levels of density till what we may call the first physically humans of a density. Even that, it was less dense than what we would perceive now. But during what we may call the time of Lemuria here on Earth, which was many, many millions of years ago. Now, again, like I say, this density is less than what we would perceive today, and this is very significant. And throughout this time, other extraterrestrial beings did come to Earth. Draco were involved from a quite early period of time. And humanity, they didn't look exactly like we do today in coloration and other aspects. They were varied in size. There were other differences. But now we are not saying evolution per se. Remember, evolution is a spiritual concept in terms of animals and other things. The physical is very much connected to the spiritual. The spiritual, of course, emanates from the divine creator. The physical has to do with the idea of the form in which that spirit manifests. And while it will respond to the environment, we are certainly not saying that this is in any way a random process, and certainly that these are accidents in any way, because they are most certainly not. In terms of, now most animals and other things do have what we would call group souls, that is, say, one soul between numerous bodies. However, we do see in terms of humanity, again, other types of spiritual influences. Physical influences by various groups, Draco, later on we see Anunnaki. And remember, humanity has gone through different types of physical transformations. So even before the Anunnaki, there were people on this earth. That is important to understand. But there have been numerous types of genetic manipulation. We may also see different types on a spiritual level of various aspects of control. This has to do with events which I may do, because it is also connected to Sirius, discuss more in detail later, connected to the Lucifer rebellion and what we would consider the fallen angels and their presence on Earth. Also other involvement by the archons here on Earth. And so they're affecting the spiritual administration on Earth, and these things are immensely detailed. Histories have been studied about this. There is information of this about many sacred texts. And so then this continued through the Lemurian period, through the Atlantean period. But throughout, there have always been spiritual teachers, and these who have existed, and these both extraterrestrial and human, to remind people of their inherent connection with the divine source. And that the kingdom, and again, like I say, the masculine term is somewhat misleading, but that this divine kingdom is within all beings. We can see this through all the great teachers of history, through Sri Krishna, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Gautama the Buddha, Jesus Christ, and the Prophet Muhammad, and countless other teachers, men and women, who not all of them are remembered nowadays on human, but these have become amongst all cultures and all people throughout the world to let them know, again, to connect to this spiritual unity. And it is also understood that we are not separate from the divine source. So when Yeshua Barabbas, Jesus Christ, has said, I and my Father are one, we understand this not to be simply in him, but that this spirit is inherent within all beings. The difference is, of course, remembering that, because having fallen to matter and under the influence of the physical world of the demiurge and the archons, we then lose track of this. And the idea of the gaining of knowledge or a form connected to that is, like I say, it's a significant point because knowledge in and of itself is, as I say, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, but the Gnostics understood that this was not necessarily something to be opposed, that this represented a mission to reverse that of the influence of the demiurge and the archons, to allow human beings to reach gnosis, to gain and this spiritual and intellectual, leading to the spiritual understanding of the divine principle.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. We will be back in about 4 minutes. You are listening to The Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Hi, join us on Monday nights for Odyssey at 10 p.m. Eastern Time in Studio B with your host, Michael David. We discuss all types of ancient and modern mysteries, from the Anunnaki to legends and mythology. We often have live guests such as well-known authors and experts on many esoteric topics. Join the intrigue and mystery every Monday night, 10 p.m. Eastern Time in Studio B.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Janet? Janet? Well, I don't know what happened to her. Nathan, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm back.
There we go. I thought you said you were back.
I am back. Now I'm back.
You're live.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Aloha, everybody, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on freedomslips.com and donate whatever you can. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. We do thank you very much for our donation. I do want to remind you that we are on a show here with a panel of Dr. Sasha Lessin, Alex Lessin, Janet Kier Lessin, Karen Christine Patrick, and Nathan Rosenblum. And before we bring back Nathan and Karen, Sasha would like to say something.
Well, a lot of what, Nathan, what you've been saying is very much like Neil Tyson's simulation theory. And simulation theory is that everything is in implicit order. It's all in the mind, if you will, if you can call it a mind, of the creator of all. Before he's gone into Leela, or divine play, that causes all the series of simulations, and that we're really just avatars of this creator of all, the prime creator. Do I got you right?
Right.
Yes,
I understand. Yeah, you're brilliant, Nathan, and I'm not sure that everybody's getting it. I get bits and pieces. I think, Sasha and Karen and you, Nathan, are probably a little bit smarter than me, but I'd just like to slow it down a little bit. So the second hour, if you don't mind, if we could do a little bit more like questions and break it up, that'd be great. But anyway, feel free to flow, though. If you're in a flow of consciousness, that's great as well. I think this information is going in on many different levels for many people. Let's see. I wanted to give Karen a chance to interject any comments or questions, and then we'll give the talking stick back to you, Nathan.
All right.
Karen, are you back with us?
Yes, I am. And when I first started getting into this literature, I was a bit confused because I kind of hit this first an experience, having experiences since starting in 1979 with really no map at all as to what I was experiencing. And then I found like different, groups of ideas about how to begin to map this knowledge. And, I'm now actually coming more and more into the Theosophical Society ideas, and that to try to get a grip on it from that as a whole entire really thick tapestry of concepts. When you're just kind of blank slate, you're just like being a normal mundane person, if maybe spiritual on a given Sunday, but then suddenly your paradigm is like just jumbled, and you're trying to remap. Okay, I don't know where I am now. Where am I? And just for people starting that process of understanding that particular framework for any kind of paranormal experience, or in my case, extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional experience, what are some suggestions on how to make that kind of material really useful?
I think that one of the most important components in this sense has to do with not only studying a wide variety of information, but more to the point, the idea of integrating it. If one can begin to see how various aspects of this knowledge connect to the unified spiritual identity or concept, one can then begin to see the emergence of patterns. And with that, it will become clear that many aspects of one's own spiritual experience, because on some level, every individual, whether within an organized religious framework or not, since he or she is a spiritual being, is bound to have spiritual experiences. And again, spiritual experiences is not simply the idea of a ritual observance necessarily, but a spirit of what we may call a consciousness or some other experience with spiritual phenomena. And therefore he or she is therefore be able to try to assist in incorporating this into the larger pattern of this spiritual understanding. This is very important so that one can see that one is not separate from this spiritual mosaic they are beginning to see and understand is coming together, but rather that they too are a component of it, that their experiences are directly connected and are a component of it, and that furthermore will assist them in evaluating and studying their own experiences as they move forward.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks.
No, I really relate to what you're saying. I think about a butterfly lands on a person's nose, and one person might say, "Oh my gosh, I was just thinking thoughts of these people that I love, and this is a symbol that I'm connected to them, and what a wonderful world this is." Whereas another person will say, "Ah, butterfly landed on my nose." It's partly your attitude.
Absolutely, yes. Perception is a key component of this.
I had a question. At the first part of this show, you mentioned that you are a spiritual magician, and that you summon spirits. You do ceremonial things, and you summon through magic. Could you tell us like who and what you summon? What's this all about?
Throughout existence, we understand that we live in a spiritual existence, that spirits are everywhere present, and the spirits have their own levels of understanding, their own information. Now, throughout all cultures, there is a tradition of being able to commune with these spirits, and this has been done through a wide variety of rituals, through channeling, through various types of spirit possession, through what we may call through oracles, through the use of divination techniques. So there have always been a wide variety of methods. And magic, in this sense, may be seen as ceremonial magic as a component. There are ceremonial magical practices in all cultures have aspects of this and their own magical systems they employ. And what would be done with this is that traditionally the use of certain symbols would be used. There's different types of regalia. And this serves, it was felt that these symbols would serve almost as a code that one might use. One might even say an alphabet of a sort that would allow one to connect with these spirits within their own language, essentially. So what a ceremonial magician such as myself would do is using these various symbols, which in Western ceremonial magic tradition are often called pentacles or sigils. And that one would utilize these. Now, these do not necessarily need to be physical on paper or metal, though they were often in other centuries, or drawn in chalk upon a floor. But rather, they can be projected on the astral plane, that is, through spiritual energy. And this way, spirits will respond to one, and depending on the types of symbols and certain other aspects of it, will determine the types of spirits that one might commune with. For example, there are all manner of nature spirits and elementals. The spirits of the water, the undines, of fire, the salamanders of the earth, the gnomes, and of the air, the sylphs and fairies. And these are known by different terms in different cultures throughout the world. And one can commune with them to obtain certain types of information or for other certain purposes, for assistance with various things. And then there are also what we may call the hierarchical type spirits, the angelic level spirits. Angels are of a different spiritual nature from people. They can and do at times incarnate into physical forms, And but at the same time, also they are their own separate level of spiritual entities. Fallen angels are still angels. It must be understood also. And so with a variety of different types of angels, you will recall, of course, that there are 9 orders of angels, as St. Dionysius and St. Gregory and others had laid out. And that one then communes with these types of spirit for various purposes. There are also other types of spirits that serve various purposes, what are known as the jinn in Islam. All manner of spirits. Certain types of ghosts can also be communicated with in this manner, though ceremonial magic does not utilize that as much, but it can be used for these purposes. So again, there are immense variety of possibilities. And this can serve not only on a practical level, but also for gathering information and knowledge. And like I say, ceremonial magic traditions of various forms have existed in all cultures throughout the world.
Okay, who wants to ask a question next? Okay, Karen. Are you there, Karen?
No, that was, yes, I'm here. So in some of this magical practice, do you also run into what we call extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional, but the ET type variety, some of the ET races that you were talking about, the Greys and whatnot?
Well, one does not actually summon extraterrestrials per se with ceremonial magic. However, because extraterrestrials do exist at different dimensional frequencies, and they also have interdimensional capabilities, through one's magical rituals, one can, on certain levels, come into contact with extraterrestrial as well as spiritual beings. Think of it, you might say, almost like a television or a radio set. That there are countless frequencies coming into your room from a television or a radio. You can't see them, but they are always present. And with magic, ceremonial magic, it is possible to connect with certain of these frequencies. And some of these, somewhat, while you wouldn't be summoning them, there is often an element of extraterrestrial, there can be extraterrestrial involvement through this method. And this has been understood, and one does, with practice and study, learn what we may call a discernment, a spiritual discernment. All spiritual traditions throughout the world have what we would call the idea of testing of one's spirits, to study what they say, and so to determine of their nature, what realms they come from, and the like. We see this in the Bible, in the Vedic texts, and indeed throughout all spiritual traditions. So in this way, one does learn to communicate with extraterrestrials to an extent, and also find out about where they come from, aspects of their nature and beliefs, etc.
Sasha.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of where they come from, I'm really interested in what I kicked off this program with, the migration from the Lyran area, or from wherever they came from before. Where did they come from? Where did these physical beings come from, and what is the path of their migration? You know, we hear stories about some of them fleeing the wars with the Dracos, going to the Pleiades, coming to Earth, going back to Venus, going back to inner Earth, coming back on the surface.
Yes, those are very important to keep in mind. Now, the Lyrans, who are a very old ancestral race of specifically the planet surrounding the stars known as Vega. Now, at one time, there came upon them a war with certain of the Dracos, as well as beings from Orion, from Rigel and Bellatrix star systems in the Orion constellation. And so there were also some Lyrans, by the way, who were aligned with the Rigel and the Orion groups and the Draco. There were some Lyrans who were in league with them. And with these wars, many of the Lyrans did migrate to other star systems, including the Pleiades, which is very important. And within our own solar system, a number of them traveled to Venus, to Earth, and to a certain extent on Mars. The Lyrians that came to Mars, by the way, though, these were the ones that were aligned with the Orion and the Draco groups. There were already inhabitants of Mars, you understand, at this time. But we do see these groups, and so there will continue to be conflicts during these periods of time. And then there also then led to the development of different factions and different alliances. Now, through various channeled material, a lot of the channeled material that does come through from Pleiadian or Lyran channels, there is often, these political ideas of their histories and their conflicts often do emerge. And by the way, there are actual records as well as physical artifacts here on Earth that do include references and actually even components of these structures. Some of these structures that were built during the times of these conflicts were in what is now Antarctica, so they're not really accessible. But there are other records and things dealing with these things. The aspects of this conflict are very well known in many parts of Africa. The Zulu and other tribes preserve the information on these conflicts and these migrations, including other types of migrations from Maldak, the planet where the asteroid belt is now. They preserve these in their traditions and about their ancestral groups, and they are very much aware that they actually trace that the griots are able to trace their ancestry connected with these migrations very accurately. You can see this also in many native tribes in the Americas and groups throughout many other parts of the world as well.
Wow, that's wonderful. To what degree do you find the Urantia book helpful?
The Urantia book is very interesting. The source of it, as you know, it's my understanding is that on a dimensional level, much of the information takes place at a different dimensional level than what we would generally perceive on Earth, which shows, somewhat of the discrepancies. There are also certain aspects of the Urantia book that we may see as, to a certain extent, it has been considered prejudiced because some of the information comes from the opponents of the Lucifer Rebellion. There have been others, like Timothy Wiley and other people who have communicated with some of the rebel angels and such and have their own takes on it. So you can see this. There are other aspects of the Urantia book that also, the information, for example, on some aspects of the Lucifer Rebellion, for example, Talagasti and Dalagastia's position on Earth and such, that, to my mind, is quite accurate. Some of the other information, for example, the material when they refer to as what they call the thought adjusters, which we may consider the spirits. Mm-hmm. I think part of the confusion with the Urantia book when discussing the idea of reincarnation, which it doesn't really seem to support, if you look very carefully, there is the idea that the thought adjusters, the spirits, do move between different vehicles. That is mentioned. And that technically, if we consider thought adjusters to be the equivalent of spirits, that is accurate because the vast majority of cases of reincarnation is not actually the soul that is reincarnating, but rather the spirit which we may consider the thought adjuster that is doing so. So if you're able to read between the lines of the text, that is the sense that you get. With the 900 or so page biography of Jesus Christ in the last third of the Urantia book, But that, again, is also interesting. My sense, again, is that Christ is not simply just one person, but rather is a number of different individuals that the Spiritus Sancti was present in, manifested in at that time. So when we see about, his journeys in the Urantia book to Rome and the other things, whereas they don't discuss travels to India, that there was another individual, Isa is quite a common name, who was also connected to the spirit, to the idea of being in multiple places at once. So that there was also Yeshua Barabbas, who was present in India, and there's other things. And again, this connects to the holographic nature of reality about being in multiple places at once. But the Urantia book is quite an interesting text to study in these regards.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nathan, what about the idea that a soul can be like in stasis or perhaps on the other side and send its information down into many forms simultaneously and many planets? Yeah, it's not limited. I mean, time is the illusion of this plane of existence, but a soul, especially on the level of a Christed consciousness, could simultaneously be in many times and places. So what you're saying, it seems to be a synthesis of different beings. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. For example, a very good example of this comes from the description of Gautama Buddha in the Lotus Sutra, where he explains that he is being moving through his incarnations. He is moving as a bodhisattva, that he is moving through the different stages of his life as Siddhartha Gautama, Sakyamuni Buddha, all simultaneously to when he is giving the discourse of the Lotus Sutra, and that he is continually interacting with beings and giving this impression on many Buddha worlds and in many states of being simultaneously, and that it is only our limited vision, the Maya, that prevents us in so many cases from beholding this truth.
So the Christed consciousness could be simultaneously on many planets and many times in many forms. Am I understanding this correctly?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Now, there is only one child principle or son, but at the same time, this is not limited to simply one manifestation. Certainly, it was present in Yeshua Barabbas, the Galilean, but at the same time, remember the Spiritus Sancti, the kingdom is within you. And so that when we say, for example, in the Gospels that of Christ that he shall return the same way in which he left, does that mean in the same physical form and in the same or in the same manner of conveyance? Well, certainly we should not limit ourselves to denying these, and certainly there can be countless ways of this manifesting, certainly in these physical aspects, but at the same time the spirit is within you. So when we discover this, then we also, the second coming is also not only in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense within people, or more precisely, it has always been there. And this is taught again through all religious teaching throughout the world, but that really it has been forgotten.
So, Karen, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I've been, poking around, and the Urantia book sort of comes to mind of different narratives of different, galactic history where there's war scenarios. And, of course, a lot of speculation about ET races visiting us, being in conflict with each other, and that, fractally sort of expressing itself on Earth. I mean, when you have all these supposed very advanced beings, where is this impetus from war coming in this galaxy? Is this a collective lesson we're learning about? Eventually we'll all transcend it together, or what is your feeling about this constant conflict that seems to have happened throughout galactic history?
It is perhaps, this again has to do with the idea again, of Maya. And Maya, or the illusion, the physicality, it can be very, very easy to get caught up in it. And so what this manifests in can manifest in the sense of I, or the idea of conflict. Now, of course, the level in which this I-ness is expressed will vary depending on the particular extraterrestrial group or faction, the particular time, again, which is also Maya. But the fact that when one is contained within this illusion, this naturally then is a breeding ground for suffering and conflict. Again, this is not to judge between right and wrong. We are all connected to the same spiritual unity. What it is significant, of course, is the idea of seeing these differences as illusory. The idea of being able to recognize these ideas of conflict as by its very nature a symptom of the illusion. And this is just as much playing out here on Earth. It has been thus for eons of time with the wars amongst people, as well as even in the interpersonal conflicts within our own lives and in our own circles. Really, it's on different scales, to be sure, but nevertheless, it's in all cases, it's a symptom of the exact same condition.
Aren't we reaching critical mass where people are becoming awake and conscious and aware and in effect getting, I'm very bored with the war and the whole concept of killing and being killed and how many ways can you die? And we keep recycling it and out. And I went to watch Star Wars yesterday and I was appalled with the level of violence and all the previews. And it's like, oh, come on, enough. It's just boring. So it seems, at least amongst my friends and the people that I talk to, maybe I have a selected group, that there is this awakening, this grand awakening, which will move us past this original system, this system we created of polarity in order to diversify creation. Anyway, thoughts, ideas, feedback from everybody on that one.
Well, that's an interesting point. You see, at this period of time, and again, like I say, time, illusory though it is, within this illusion of time, there are, of course, changes. Now, we are still in, of course, the Kali Yuga, and will be in it. Remember, I accept the long version of the Yugas, so we will still be in it for a long time. But at the same time, within the Kali Yuga, there are changes, and we are moving towards a transition point to what would be considered a more positive place. This is described, for example, in the Vedic texts as that within the Kali Yuga, there will be a 10,000 year period, a minor golden age, albeit though still within the Kali Yuga. And we might say even the first 1,000 years of this, so to speak, would be the equivalent of the millennium in Revelation. Remember, you will recall, of course, that Christ spoke of the end of the age, the transition of the age, not the end of the world. So that we therefore see this transition. This then is also connected on an astrological side to the moving into the Aquarian age. Now, the exact point in which we move into the Aquarian age has always been a subject of controversy. Again, it has to do with how the Earth receives these energies. But at the same time, within these cycles, and we can see this again throughout cylindrical systems throughout the world, there is going to be more of a moving into this state of being. Now, it is very important to keep in mind that as we move into this higher level of consciousness, there is bound to be a certain amount of shaking up, you might say. The amount of this and how deeply it will affect society, That is, of course, a big question. When we look at many different texts say that humanity does have a choice to an extent about how much of this shaking up or how painful it may be to people. And then we that's how we get into concept of earth changes and how that may human consciousness may play a role in this. And again, like I say, since it also depends on what we perceive and what particular timelines and other such things that we are on. But, so depending on these things, how much some of the things that we read about, some of the what we consider more negative aspects, for example, described in John's Revelation about more of the conflict or disasters, or many of the other texts, for example, throughout different periods of the world that do suggest these aspects. How much of that does manifest or that manifest on the timelines that we may be on? Again, to a great extent, that does depend on not only individual human perception, but also the consciousness of humanity, because the earth as a living consciousness does by its very nature react to humans. So when it is said, for example, in John's Revelation that these things must come to pass, or what example this means is must come to pass as per the conditions that were in existence at that time, what would be perceived in the future. But of course, since we do have the divine gift of free will, to a great extent, we have the ability, not only simply individually, but as a collective, to determine how things will play out as we transition. And all accounts do indicate that ultimately we do move into this more understanding, we may say, state on Earth.
Okay. Karen.
Well, that's really good to hear. I hope we're progressing, because some days it doesn't always feel that way. What kinds of things do you suggest to individual people to progress themselves, into a more peaceful state? My first vote for doing that would turn off the TV. That would be my first suggestion. What are some of your ideas for helping people get into a better headspace?
The most important thing to keep in mind is to never entirely lose the sense of remembering that you are the divine microcosm, that the divine spirit is within all beings. And to also remember that the idea of the separateness is an illusion. It is important that much of the energy that we used for thoughts are things, you understand. And as we think, that does over time affect not only the physical, but then also connects to our emotional other aspects. Therefore, so much of the energy that is used on thoughts, now thoughts in this sense I use in a very different sense from the term of gnosis, which is a spiritual, intuitive understanding. Now, having intellectual information is valuable and important. It is important to know these things. But so much of our thoughts are not towards what would be considered any productive purpose. These are distractions, behaviors that don't contribute to well-being. But what, in this case, one ought to do is that the energy that one gives to these thoughts, if one drops them from or moves them from the areas of thoughts, of fears and concerns, and moves them down or up to the heart area of the heart chakra, then these energies can be transformed into heart energy emanating from the heart of a higher level of spiritual understanding rather than these other types of thoughts. And this brings up a very interesting point, because you can actually see, this is a very important exercise that I encourage people to do. dropping what we consider this thought energy into the area of the heart, transforming it into heart energy. Throughout the world, the heart has been understood as a very important spiritual center. And this can be even seen in the physical form of the heart. Now, you will note that humanity have two main types of muscle tissue within their bodies. One of them is what we would call the smooth muscle tissue. For example, this is a tissue that's in the intestines, which is generally, for example, involuntary. Then there is the striated muscle tissue in the muscles in our arms and legs, which is generally voluntary. The heart, however, presents a paradox in this sense, or apparent paradox, in that it is made of striated muscle tissue, but is generally involuntary, the heartbeat. But what this is that this shows how, even in the Maya, the illusion, the physical form that the heart has shows its ultimate spiritual connection, because it is humanity's destiny that the heart shall be conscious. The striated muscle tissue of the heart is the sign of this, that the consciousness, that in the future the heart itself will be conscious. And so no more will we be able to say, as it was said unto the prophet Jeremiah, that the heart is illusory or terribly wicked, because we shall know ourselves within our hearts and connect to the divine principle within the spiritual center of our hearts.
Great. So, Nathan, it seems to me that many traditions are hung up on the idea of hierarchy, that some consciousness is more valuable, some lives, some consciousnesses are worth more than others. I know the Anunnaki were big on that certain genetic lines, royals think they're better because they're royals. The Bodlanders of Agartha Inner Earth have a king, and ultimately, to me, this clinging to hierarchy is anathema, and that it stifles the lights that various consciousnesses have to contribute. Could you react to that?
Yes, well, again, hierarchy. In the ultimate divine principle, there is no hierarchy. There simply is. Within Maya illusory, both in the spiritual and in the physical, there do have developed hierarchies of various types. Again, like I say, these are Maya. Part of the reason that this idea of the hierarchy has developed, it had to do with what was considered to be the ability among some to perceive spirituality or the spiritual energies more clearly than others. Now, it is, of course, inherent in all beings to perceive the spirituality, just so many have forgotten it. But what this has led to is the development of these illusions of hierarchies. Now, again, I'm not making a value judgment about the beings that are within hierarchies. But at the same time, it is necessary to understand that hierarchies are not only illusory, but also very much deceptive, in that it creates the impression among people that some may be more worthy than others. And unfortunately, that has developed amongst certain groups. You do mention and some of these groups, they do have very real spiritual knowledge that cannot be denied. I mean, there has always been great knowledge among Draco, amongst the Anunnaki, in Agartha with the king of the world, and the subservience to the king of the world in Agartha. But at the same time, and like I say, we can certainly learn, and we are not judging any of these beings in any way for being within these hierarchies, but what we are saying is that in the ultimate sense, these can serve to mislead. And remember, the divine has always been within, and once one connects to that, one finds that one is already there, that it's not, in the ultimate sense, it's not even a journey to this understanding. It is simply remembering that it has always been there.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
I have two things I'd like to address. First of all, angels and Christ. Do angels indeed originate from perhaps a higher dimension, another sphere, much like Christ coming from a higher dimension? Then we have the historical Jesus, the Christed consciousness, and we have the historical angels, which appear to be another word for messengers. Like in Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels actually were Anunnaki faction to the other. So then all this gets confused into each other.
Right.
Elaborate on that.
Angels were a type of spiritual creation. They were created before what we would be considered the physical manifestation of existence, and they were created in groups, in mass. And eventually, certain of these groups became attached to certain areas within the physical existence, and then certain hierarchies did develop. And for this reason, to assist for various purposes, certain angels began to incarnate into physical forms, and therefore assumed various roles on different planets. Angels are, of course, pure spirit, but they did begin to incarnate and also within the astral plane acquire more of what we might call physical forms of various types. And this has been the case for a wide variety of angelic beings, including those referred to as the fallen. And the main fall, there have been various angelic rebellions, but of course the most famous is the Lucifer rebellion. Lucifer, and this I will be discussing this more in my Kingston lecture. So Lucifer, whose actual angelic name is Satanael the Luciferge, not to be confused with Satan Satanas, who was one of his top lieutenants. They were formed about at the same time and quickly became associated actually with the Sirius star system. And from that point, were able to manifest in various forms, including eventually Satanael Lucifer incarnated on Maldak, where the asteroid belt is now located. And this was then involved in the Lucifer rebellion, the rebellion against what they perceived as illegitimate authority by what would be considered the emanation of the archons and the demiurge. And this you have read about in the Bible, in the Urantia texts and other texts. But again, we do see the angelic spirits can manifest certainly in this physical form.
We're back. We're back. We got booted off. Sorry about that. I don't know where we left off.
Well, I had just finished talking about how some of the angels hadn't been able to manifest in physical form. And this included some of the fallen angels and other aspects of that.
Okay, and what about the Christ? Is Christ?
Well, in the Christ spirit, we may see this Christos, you recall from the Greek, is the same meaning as Messiah from Moses, the anointed. Now, the spirit of what we may call the child or the son, again, like I say, the masculine term is somewhat misleading, but this is the emanation from what we may term the spiritual principle of the masculine and the feminine. It is interesting to me that, by the way, a number of the early church fathers, such as Tertullian, did see the Spiritus Sancti, the Holy Spirit, as being directly a feminine principle, interestingly enough. So a number of the early church fathers actually did see this also as the feminine principle. But that from this was emanated what we may call the sun. And again, this is outside of time. With Christ as manifested in the person of Yeshua Barabbas, that is Joshua Barabbas, son of the Father, in the Aramaic, we can certainly see this process in action. Now, of course, the physical being was certainly a highly evolved soul in Yeshua Barabbas, who was born to a Mother Mary, who is, of course, a very great spiritual being in her own right. But particularly significant here is the fact that it was at the time of his baptism that Yeshua Barabbas became anointed, became Christos, and that this spirit directly connected with him. But then, as you will recall from the Gospels, it is said that the spirit then exited him at the time of the crucifixion. The Gospels do indeed say that he gave up the ghost. But then at what would be perceived as the resurrection, that the Spiritus Sancti was then reunited with the physical manifestation of Yeshua Barabbas, Jesus Christ. So in this way, we can directly see how at the most important points of his life, the baptism, and then later at the crucifixion, we can see how the spirit, the Christ spirit, directly manifested in his life, and then again at the resurrection.
Well, Janet and Sasha fell off again.
Yes.
Well, hello. I can ask a question too. Is there this principle of mother, father, God, mother, father, child, God? Is this something that is just endemic in sense to the Earth story, or is this seen in other cultures, other galactic communities?
It's inherent throughout all of creation. This is our natural rhythm. Now, in the ultimate sense, it all directly connects back to the spiritual unity, which we may call Para Brahman, which is beyond duality, which is beyond space or time or any other term that we can use to describe it, which is the spiritual state of being. However, since we are limited in our ability to express these things in words, we do move into this perception of then the duality and then eventually into the Trinity connected to this principle. But of course, in the ultimate sense, the true unifying sense, the Parabrahman, the eternal spiritual presence, is beyond this duality or this Trinity that is, we may simply call the I am. And that then is the true nature of the divine.
The I am is really also something we can connect with in the idea that we have, that we're aware of ourselves and have consciousness and have a trinity within us, body, mind, and spirit being one of the patterns. One thing I got by being a contactee is that it felt like this contact happens through like the quintessential, universal tree sort of system. Like I felt as I made contact and deepened it, that I felt that I was, sometimes it felt like it was communing with an aspect of myself. Sometimes it was just feeling like I was going through some kind of central awareness that then branched off to it, like another branch of the tree, so to speak. And it, in this way, that universality made it easier to really cross some big divides of our perception of who we are, particularly when I talk to beings that were physically very different than I would. If I was standing in the same room as that being, I would probably feel a bit trepidatious because of the differences, because of our prejudices against, insectoid forms and whatnot. Is this something, one thing that I've kind of gone around with somebody about is the fact that it's disturbing to them that people's belief systems become so different from where they started from, so to speak, in their life, and yet universal to each other. It's quite a phenomenon that people who begin to deepen their contact actually, start to talk the same language, start to say the same words and ideas. Is this something that you've observed in watching that phenomenon of contact?
Yes, there is very much an underlying pattern that is inherent in this, and this is not coincidental either. Part of this has to do with similar messages that are being broadcast by different groups, of different extraterrestrial groups. A part of it, however, there is another aspect, and that again has to do with one's own internal knowing, gnosis. These information have always been contained within you. However, it is not necessarily consciously understood. And as you are moved through incarnations, at various of your incarnations, it will manifest to one extent or another. More and more, there is a beginning of a universal awareness amongst contactees, and indeed people throughout numerous other spiritual traditions and disciplines that are coming to this same realization. And this has been predicted throughout the world in many different cultures, that at this time in our shared history, you would begin to see this universal connection and manifestation in this sense. The sense of remembering these things that have been so long forgotten, but remembering all of this information, to seeing this interconnection, and that it would manifest, albeit with individual variation, but at the same time and with the same basic message and same basic understanding.
Did we get Sasha and Janet back yet?
No, ma'am.
Okay, well, we'll just keep going. Okay, so for people, I try to keep in mind people who never, they're very new in their experience, their contact experience, or whatever, what have you. It's like so much of the time people get this sense of urgency, or even the messages they get are very urgent, pertaining to, for instance, the environmental problems that we have on our planet, the risk of nuclear war and that sort of thing. And, it's kind of frustrating because that sense of urgency is a bit difficult to integrate into, what we'd say is regular life. You have to somehow put that urgency down, for the first part of the day to make a living and take care of family needs. But, the integration process seems a big challenge. What would you say to people to help with the integration process? As I guess we're getting ready to try to call Sasha.
Well, it is important.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, we're back on the show.
Yes. With the integration of this information, it needs to be understood that really the only time is now. And therefore, what this means in practice is that when we perceive as urgent, we have to understand, again, the relative, because since it is always now, we are never separate from the tasks that we perceive ourselves to do or that we desire to do. Therefore, if we are to understand that each aspect of our lives is of a spiritual nature, we have to understand that incorporating this within our lives, because the most important lesson to be learned from all this is the lesson of consciousness. Therefore, if on a consciousness level we are able to apply these teachings, there is, by this nature, a magnifying effect. Because this consciousness, remember, as I have mentioned previously, and as all spiritual traditions do, teach thoughts are things. Therefore, what we manifest in consciousness in the same way will affect all of our actions and then spreads amongst people this unity of consciousness, because in the ultimate sense, remember, it's not a matter of individual consciousness, but rather a connecting to the universal consciousness. And we, as an aspect of this universal consciousness, by maintaining that attitude throughout our lives, actually are working to integrate that into the very nature of what we perceive as being an existence.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Janet, you want to ask a question? Is she with us? Oh, boy, it's a fun night for them there in Hawaii. When I kind of grew with the idea of how I was going to integrate it, I realized. Hello.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, we have just a couple minutes left. Let's all have our final comments and let Nathan talk about how he can be reached. Go ahead, Dr. Lessin.
I just found it extremely stimulating. I love listening to you, Nathan. Thank you so much.
Yes, Nathan.
So,
we did finish the last 10 minutes, but go ahead, finish your thought, Karen.
Yes. So people can go to my website. That's www.theserpentrises, that's one word, by the way, .com. They can find out information about my upcoming programs and lectures. There's also a way in which people can contact me directly through the website should they have any questions or comments or other information. And most importantly,
Thank you so much, Nathan.
Of
Karen,
course.
Thank you so much. Wonderful show.
Aloha.
Aloha. This has been the Sacred Nation Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.